Earlier this week, I started to get phone calls from an unknown number, connecting me to a robotic voice claiming to be calling from my bank's fraud team. The robot was claiming that one of my credit cards was being used for some online shopping, and they needed me to verify this transaction. So immediately, the warning bells in my brain started to ring, and I ran a few simple checks on that number to confirm it was indeed a fraud. Banking scams are ridiculously commonplace. In the first half of this year, victims of one type of bank scam, called the Authorised Push Payment or APP scam, they lost a total of £355 million. Scams of this type were up by 71% in the first half of the year. In this video, I'm talking about the introduction of a new law that should tip the balance in favour of you, the bank customer, giving banks less discretion when it comes to paying you compensation. This is the news that the government is introducing a new law designed to protect blameless victims of bank fraud better. Banking customers who are tricked into transferring money to an account controlled by a scammer, this practice known as Authorised Push Payment or APP scamming, they will be legally entitled to compensation from their bank. As I explained in the introduction, APP scams are a big deal. In the first half of this year, this type of bank scam rose by 71%, a total of £355 million lost by victims, with a total of £754 million lost to fraud in the first half of 2021. APP scams represent a significant proportion of the total amounts lost. While banks are currently governed by a voluntary code of conduct designed to refund victims, some consumer groups think this approach doesn't offer sufficient protection for customers. The current approach gives banks some wriggle room to interpret the rules a bit differently, and that leads to some victims getting a refund and others not, despite having very similar circumstances. When the law starts forcing banks to give a refund to these victims, banking regulators will also demand that the largest banks publish fraud reimbursements data. The largest banks then, AIB Group UK, Bank of Scotland, Barclays, Clydesdale Bank, the Cooperative Bank, HSBC, Lloyds, Metro Bank, Monzo, NatWest/RBS, Nationwide Building Society, Northern Bank, Santander, Starling Bank, TSB, Ulster Bank and Virgin Money. That's 14 of them. The thinking on disclosure goes a bit like this. If customers become more aware of the scale of fraud cases involving their bank and what proportion of victims are reimbursed, it could encourage them to change their behaviour. The plans are under consultation until January, and then the government can bring forward new legislation in Parliament. Once introduced, banks will be subject to a legal obligation to provide these refunds, not a voluntary code of conduct, and that, I think, has to be good news for customers. Annabelle Holtz, Chief Executive of consumer group Which, called the move a huge win for consumers, saying people are still losing life-changing sums of money every day, so the Treasury must move swiftly towards introducing the necessary legislation. Katie Warribeck, Managing Director of Economic Crime at the banking industry body UK Finance, said, "Fraud has a devastating impact on victims, and the money stolen funds serious organised crime. So the banking industry's primary focus is always on stopping these scams happening in the first place." With £300 million has been reimbursed to thousands of customers since the APP voluntary code was introduced in 2019, we agree that more needs to be done and have long called for a regulated code backed by legislation to ensure consumer protections apply consistently. My final thoughts on this one then, prevention is better than cure. Even with legal protections in place, do everything you possibly can to avoid becoming the victim of a scam in the first place. If you're ever asked to move money between accounts, question it and then question it again before you move any cash. Always call your bank and call them on the number that you find on the back of your credit or debit card. Don't fall for the phone calls like the ones I've had this week, claiming to come from your bank or its fraud team. And never rely on emails, as these can be spoofed or intercepted. The key message here is don't rush your decision making. A genuine organisation like your bank will not mind waiting. Despite the rise in these APP scams this year, it has actually become harder for scammers. That's since the introduction of the new confirmation of payee service whenever you instruct a bank transfer. That service works by your bank checking the sort code and account number you give them against the name you give them for the bank account. It's not foolproof by any means, but it's a valuable additional step in the process, and it goes some way towards reducing the risk of fraud. And of course, if you carry out the necessary checks first and you still become a victim of this type of fraud, your bank should reimburse you under the terms of this current voluntary code. Please do take care out there. Let me know in the comments below, have you ever been victim of an authorised push payment scam? I'd love to hear from you. Thank you for watching this video. Until next time, I'm Martin Bamford, and remember, when it comes to your money, the more you know, the faster it can grow.